Mandy.
Hello.
You guys sit there and wait and you watch the clock hit 12:55 and then hit the enter key? Okay.
I realize it's 12:56 and then try to hit the key and expect.
Oh, 12:56. You keep me waiting an extra minute. Oh, jeez. See, here comes Teresa. And there's Rachel too. Okay. And then we're looking for Aisha, not yet. And Michaela may not be able to. So I'm gonna go one more minute. In the meantime, while we're waiting, I should just ask to see if there's anybody who has any questions. We're going to talk about the identify constituents in a little while. So we're going to go over that homework sheet after we kind of review some PowerPoint. But other questions? Guess not.
I actually have one.
Okay.
So the constituent, I saw your email. So do we have to write the constituent in the smallest words?
Well, not the smallest words. You need to get down to a, you have to get down to the phrase level. Sometimes that's down to the word. Sometimes it's down to a couple of words, particularly if we're looking at something like a noun phrase. Your noun phrase oftentimes will only just be the determiner and the noun, and so that would be a noun phrase. But you need to make sure that you break it down all the way. Hello, Aisha. Oh, she can't hear me yet. Okay. Hello, Aisha. So, yes, you need to break that down. I'm going to walk us through it, through the processes we're going through today, because it's going to be a big chunk. There's a big chunk of this on the exam, at least the sizable portion. So we want to go make sure that you understand what it is that I'm looking for, and we're going to go through a couple of extra new ones today and so forth. But yes, so what I should say to everybody is I was looking through the assignment, identify constituents and give proof key, proof 1. That was the one that was due last Wednesday. And as I was going through there, I noticed a lot of people were pretty incomplete. They might have marked the subject or they might have marked a verb, but they didn't give me the list of the constituents that are there. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more, and we'll go through some examples, but make sure that you're listing them out, and I'll point that out a couple more times. Don't try to underline and put parentheses around. Just go ahead and spend the extra time to list them out, because when you do that, you're much less likely to miss one. And if you're trying to do the brackets and parentheses and underlines and all of that, both of us stand a risk of missing something. So I would suggest that you make sure you take identify constituents exercise 1 after we're done talking about it, and go back to the key that I sent you this morning and reconcile the difference between yours and what I have in the key, just to make sure that you've really got it down pat. Okay? Other questions? All right, well then let's go in here and just review this whole idea of phrases and constituents. And let's see, yep, I think I shared it, right? Yep, I got it, very good. So we're gonna look at phrases and constituents. Remember a couple of things. One, in our old life, pre-linguistics, we probably thought of phrases as always being multiple words. from the standpoint of linguistic syntax, that's not always the case. We oftentimes will have a single word phrase. We'll see a few of those today. The other thing to remember is when I talk about constituent or I talk about phrase, we're kind of looking at those as two synonymous things. It's basically the same thing. Constituents sometimes will actually have a whole clause in addition to just phrases, but phrase, clause, and constituents we can often use synonymously, and I will switch back and forth as I'm talking, so just try to keep that one square, okay? So here's the ugly sheet. Just want to remind you, portfolio part 2 is due today at 12:55. This is some additional information about portfolio part 3. The first thing I want you to recognize is this is a pair exercise, not an individual exercise like the others have been. Second, I want you to recognize that you're only putting together one lesson instead of 5. But that one lesson needs to really be complete with all the realia that you might use, or manipulables, all the exercises, all your assessments, and you should also have a short demonstration of your activity. You're going to have 15 minutes to discuss it. And this is very much like my first ESL job interview. What they made me do was put together a whole 1-hour lesson. And then during the interview, I had to go in and I had to explain to them how I would go about using the lesson. They didn't give me an hour to talk through it. They just gave me 10 or 15 minutes to explain my process. That's kind of what we're doing with you guys, okay? So while it's only one exercise, it needs to be very complete. If you're going to have, let's say, an anchor chart as realia or as something to look at, I will expect to be able to see that. You can take a picture of it, put it in there. If you are using something in a game, for instance, a lot of people have put together exercises and lessons around sentences or parts of sentences, and they've actually used things like dice to as a manipulable or as realia to actually run a game. So if you're going to have those kinds of things, you need to make sure that you take a picture of it, and that's going to be included in your package that you turn in. Now the topic this time around, the first time we did everything except verbs. This time in portfolio 2, we did all kinds of verb exercises. As we get ready to do this third part, the topic is really kind of wrapped around sentences. And there are lots of things that you can do with sentences. For instance, you could talk about compound sentences and complex sentences versus simple sentences. A lot of people have taken simple sentences and made their students put them together as a compound sentence or as a complex sentence. We haven't talked about these yet, but we will be talking about them in the next couple of weeks. So if these terms don't ring a bell, that's okay. We're still going to deal with those yet. Passives, that was something that was due, I think, last week. And so passive sentences, how you do a passive sentence versus an active sentence. How do you use subordinate clauses? How do we make subordinate clauses? And the idea of relative clauses. Again, the clause issue is something that you're going to be looking at ready for Wednesday and for next week. So if you don't know these terms yet, that's still okay. We're going to be dealing with them shortly. So just like all of the others, this one is going to be due on 4/28 at 12:55. The difference is the other two have been due on a Monday. 4/28 is actually going to be a Wednesday. And you may remember that I said pretty soon we're going to start going back to classes on both Mondays and Wednesdays. 428 is a Wednesday, and it's going to be due that day. And you're going to put it up on D2L. I don't need to get two. When you guys are working together in a pair, either one of you can submit the project. Just make sure both names are on the project material. So if you're working, I know Kayla and Michaela have signed up to work together. In their case, just one of them needs to submit the project, but it needs to come in before 12:55 on 428. Goes into D2L. And before we actually get there, I'm going to give you 2 class periods on 419 and on 421, where you're actually going to have to sign into Zoom, but then I will break you up into breakout rooms and you will have 2 class periods to put this together. That way you don't have to try to get groups together. You don't have to try to span weekends. What the best thing to do is, once you know who your group is, maybe even before 419, I'll give you the opportunity to talk about it. And then you can try to figure out what you're going to do, and you can use the time before 419 and after 421 to actually do independent work as well as the group work during the course times or the class schedules. Okay, so you'll have 2 to do the preparation. Then we will spend 2 days also having you guys present your plans. It'll be due on 428. We'll probably have 3 people do their presentation on 428, and we'll have 2 people, or 2 pairs, I should say, 2 teams, do it on 5-3. So we've got 10 people, and that'll give us 5 pairs, and you can work right through it. 2 in-class sessions and the time around it, and then a 15-minute presentation on one of the last 2 class days. So you're going to turn in all of the documented lesson. You're going to put it in a lesson plan to start with. You need to put it in a lesson plan, just like you've done with the 10 that you've already done so far. So you're going to have that same kind of a layout that documents the lesson. You should also have all of the materials. I'm going to expect some kind of presentation slides when you're actually presenting the new information. That's in addition to the lesson plan sheets, but I would expect a PowerPoint or a Google Slides presentation. You should have assessments. So instead of just telling me what the assessment is in this case, I'll need to see what it is. That assessment could be lots of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a quiz, doesn't necessarily mean it's a worksheet, but you're going to have to present to me what you're doing for assessment fairly specifically. Any exercises that you've got, any worksheets that you use. Both people in pair. Let's see. I would suggest on the morning that you're on the morning of the 28th that you send me a copy of the PowerPoint or the Google Slides, just to make sure that we have access to it. If something goes wrong or your computer breaks down, we're still going to want to have that. So I would ask you to just email me the PowerPoint separately so that we can recover from a technology failure. want you to make the lesson engaging, make it something fun and or at least interesting, if not fun, for your students. As I mentioned, you'll have 15 minutes to explain your lesson, show us your realia, and give us some kind of a demonstration of the activity. You can use audience participation if you want, so you can ask everybody questions as you're going along if you want to. If you want to have other people involved in the demonstration, that's perfectly fine. But remember, you're going to be limited to about 15 minutes. You're not going to present the whole lesson as if we were your students. You should be ready to answer the questions. So that means as you're putting this thing together, if you put something together on subordinate clauses, you ought to be able to answer questions about that. Or if you're talking about complex sentences, you should have a good handle on what it is that you are presenting so that you can answer questions about all of that. And then finally, audience. That's everybody else who isn't doing a particular presentation. Be prepared to ask questions as they go through, and be prepared to answer questions if they ask questions of the class. Okay? But I get real tired of being the only one to ask questions. So as you're going through this, kind of watch for places where you could raise a question of clarification, or think of the comments that you would like to make to the team who is doing the presentation. Okay? Now, if that sounds complicated, it's not really. We're just going to come in, and on those 2 days, we'll go through the 5 presentations. Just make sure that you turn it all in on 428 and make sure that you're prepared to present it on 428, because I'm likely to just choose either volunteers to do it on the first day, and if I don't have enough volunteers, I'll just select them randomly to do it on the first day. Everybody who doesn't do it on 428 will finish up on May 3rd. Okay? We good? Anybody have a question? No? Come on. Yeah. Very good. So let's get then onto the idea of phrases and clauses and sentences. First, and we've already seen these items before, but phrases are going to be groups of words, and if they are missing either the subject or the verb, or if they're missing both a subject and a verb, they must be phrases. And generally in writing, they cannot stand alone as a sentence. The next level up from phrases, if we're thinking about a hierarchy, what's more important or what's bigger than something else, typically clauses would be the next level up. And once again, we're going to look at that as a group of words. In this case, you're almost definitely going to have more than one, because you have to have both a subject and a verb. And if you have to have a subject and a verb, you're almost always looking at least 2 words. Not always, but almost always. Now, when we have clauses, some of them will stand alone. That means they're an independent clause. They're basically the same thing as a simple sentence. And that simple sentence has to have a subject and it has to have a verb. At the same time, we may also have clauses that we have to call dependent. And dependent clauses cannot stand alone, typically because they do not represent a complete thought. The things that I've given you as examples before are things like, before I went to the store. Well, if that's the only thing I say, you have no other context. Before I went to the store should ask you, before you went to the store, what? Because I'm missing something to complete the thought. That would be a dependent clause. And interestingly, oftentimes dependent clauses are a bit longer than independent clauses. And it's usually because they start with some kind of a conjunction that pushes them down and makes them not a complete thought. The next topic that we're covering is going to be independent and dependent clauses. So you're going to have some time to look those over in the textbook, in the videos, and you'll also have some exercises to kind of work through to put your hands or get your hands around the idea. But phrases will miss either the subject or the verb or both, and clauses will have both. And another one is sentences. That's the next level up. And sentences are going to be groups of words. They also have both the subject and the verb. The difference between a sentence and a clause is a sentence is always a complete thought and can stand alone by itself as a sentence. Clauses work that way sometimes, but in other cases, they can't stand alone. All right. So as we get into dependent and independent clauses here coming up in the next topic, you'll be able to do that. Just don't be too surprised when you see that a phrase may be a group of one or more words, not necessarily two or more. And that's kind of hard to get a handle around sometimes, simply because we've always thought of phrases as groups of more than one word. But we'll see how that works, okay? So we talked about phrase classifications, and we said phrases get classified as noun phrase, verb phrase, prepositional phrase, adjective phrase, and adverb phrase. And the way we classify those phrases is based on the head word. And the head word is essentially the most important word in the phrase. Usually, it means that the head word is the thing being described by the other things in the sentence. That's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, but essentially the most important word in a phrase is what we're looking for. Let's see, did somebody chat me? Head word, scissor hands. Yeah, oh, Edward Scissorhands. I never saw the movie, but I'll try to catch up. Okay, so head word. So we go down here, we see all of these. I'm pretty sure these are maybe even the same ones I've already talked about. A noun with all its complements. The complements are the things that describe it or make it complete. And so while dog could be a single word phrase, perhaps, or better yet, dogs could be a single word. The black dog is a bit more complete. And notice that the and dog are describing the dog. So this whole thing is going to be a noun phrase, not just dog by itself. The big glass building in Chicago. Well, there we've got a determiner telling us which building it is. We've got a couple of them that are describing, a couple of adjectives that are describing the building, big and glass. And we've even got a prepositional phrase there that's telling us where the building is. So by the time we get through, we know it's the, big, and glass, and building, but it's also the one that's in Chicago, not the one in Phoenix. Verb phrases. Same kind of a deal. The verb in the clause and all its complements. Basically, we're thinking of the complete predicate. Some words or some verbs can stand alone. I swam. When I was young, I swam. What'd you do yesterday? I swam. Others actually have to have other words with it because they can't stand alone. And we use devoured. Pulverized would be another example. You can't just, I pulverized. What did you do yesterday? I pulverized. Well, you got to say, I pulverized what? I pulverized rocks, or I pulverized breadcrumbs or something. And then we've also got times when there's a word in front of the verb that describes the verb, and we have to include that in the verb phrase as well. So in this case, swam stands alone as a verb phrase. Devoured the steak would be a verb phrase. and quickly ran home would be a verb phrase. Notice that we're going to be dealing primarily with single clauses or single clause sentences. And so basically you can think of the verb phrases starting with the verb or anything that goes in front of it describing the verb, and then going all the way to the end of the sentence. If you're used to the idea of a complete predicate, that's what we're talking about as a verb phrase. A prepositional phrase starts with a preposition, and it's got a noun phrase as its object. The object of the preposition is a noun phrase, and it's almost always there. There are a few cases where we can leave that off, largely in relative clauses and in questions. And even though your teachers have told you you never end a sentence with a preposition, that's not really true. We do it all the time. Okay. Aisha, I saw you come back. Did I see your hand as a question? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I'm sorry? Yeah, I can now. Yep.
You hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of cutting in and out. You have a question?
I don't know. Never mind.
I don't want to. Never mind. If you got a question.
No, I was just going to ask, can a word quickly be a verb phrase? Like how swam is? Can the word just be quickly? Okay.
Yep, it can. What did you do last night? I ate. Well, you don't always have to say what you ate, but ate by itself is perfectly good. Swam is good. I slept. Sleep in the past. Or what do you do at night? I sleep. All of those things could be very easily be single word verb phrases. Prepositional phrases, occasionally, but almost always you can have a noun phrase there. And then you've got adjective phrases. It's the adjective with its complements, which are typically going to be adverb intensifiers, like very, to intensify the word small, or barely, to intensify the word alive, for instance. And adverb phrases, it's an adverb and all its complements. Now, we've talked about all of these before, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but I'm really trying to make sure that you get the grasp of this thing, because the phrases are what we really are building our sentences for. All right? So, phrase structure rules. I talked to a couple of people on the
Mm.
Uh-huh.
adjectives may have an adverb in front, but it's mainly the adjective. The same thing goes with adverb phrases. If you look at the adverb phrase here, it does not have an adjective in it, right? It has an adverb, and maybe it's got an extra intensifying adverb, but it doesn't have an adjective in that phrase. It would usually be embedded inside of an adjective. Again, preposition and noun phrase, I'm going to call it that it's almost way up in the 90%, so it's going to have a noun phrase after it. But we do have a few exceptions in questions and in relative clauses, particularly. Okay? But take a printed copy of this and have it next to you as you sit down and do your exercises. You could also, I don't think it's in your textbook this way. That's why I've got it printed up for you. So print it up, have it with you when you go through it. Okay? Remember, the parentheses indicate that it may be there or may not, that it's optional. The plus sign may indicate that we might have more than just one. And these curly braces would say we'd only get one of the things inside those curly braces if we get it in. Okay? So let's see here. And don't forget, this is another important piece, that phrases very often have embedded phrases within them. The phrases are hierarchical. So I might have the phrase fish all standing by itself, but I could have a fish on the line. And if I do that on the line, you can see it's a prepositional phrase that's describing which fish. And on the line has an embedded noun phrase in it. And oftentimes you'll have a verb phrase or verb that has an embedded noun phrase in it, just like this. So keep this whole idea of embedded phrases in mind as you go through the phrase exercise, the constituent exercises that you have. It's hierarchical. It's not just linear, one after the other. It's basically one with potentially lower level phrases or lower level constituents inside them. Now, on the final exam, what I want you to see is, and it's about half of the exam, I'm going to give you some sentences. And they're going to say, identify the constituent phrases. And notice that I said identify them and list them. I'm going to expect to literally see a list of, here's the phrase, here's its phrase type. So you're going to go through there, and that's going to be worth 2 points. Yeah. You'll identify them as their type, whether they're noun, verb, preposition, adjective, adverb phrases. And you're going to make sure that you identify lower level phrases inside there. Embedded phrases are very important here to show the hierarchy as we build the sentence. And when you think back about a week ago, we talked about the general tests of constituency. There was a handout in D2L for you. The top 3 had the rules to figure out what is a constituent and what is not. Those are the top 3 general tests, and that's used to decide this is a phrase and this is not. Now, what we haven't done, maybe you did it on today's exercise. I'm also going to expect you to go in there and identify the sentence function of every phrase that you identify. Some of your noun phrases are probably going to be the subject. Other noun phrases might be a direct object, or they might be the object of a preposition. But you're going to need to go in there and tell me what is the function of each one of the constituent phrases. And then finally, this goes back to what we did early on. Identify the verb type for each sentence. Now, I know that this was in the first half and it was already on the midterm. But the reason I put it here is you can check your work by yourself. If you know what a verb type is supposed to look like, or what kind of complements it's going to have, you've got the opportunity to go in and look at your sentence and say, yep, this is a direct object, or this is an adjunct. And so I'm going to put that on there. You'll get 2 points for identifying all of the phrases, 2 points for correctly identifying each phrase, this function, and 1 point for telling me what type of verb it is. And that one type of verb could be, how does it help you determine whether I've got a transitive verb or an intensive verb, and what's a subject complement? So I'm quiet now. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if you can put an example of how you want that to be written, or how you want it to.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna show you in just a minute.
Okay.
So it'll probably be, the way to do that would be generally the same way you're gonna do it on the exercises. Okay? Although I may not have asked you for the verb type, you just have to put it somewhere, but I will show you, yes. So this is the idea here. This is gonna be a chunk of the test, because this is how we go in there and figure out, have you really learned the parts of speech? Have we learned what phrases are all about? Do we recognize what our sentence functions are in terms of subjects and objects and complements, etc.? So this is where we're pulling a whole bunch of this stuff together. I'll give you other information about the remainder of the test later, but this one becomes pretty important. And so I want you to pay close attention to your work in comparison to the keys. And bring me questions if you don't understand why I mark something the way I do. Now, this is what I don't want you to do. Don't go in here and start underlining stuff and give me a couple of phrases. I'm going to be looking for every one of the phrases that I know of that are here, and I will be looking for them to be identified individually with their type and their function. So that's kind of where we're headed. All right. So what I want to do is I would like you to take out identify constituents and give proof on number 1. That would have been the one that was due on Friday. I'm sorry, on last Wednesday. So get that out so we can go through this, because this is just a little bit simpler than what you're going to have to be doing later. Because here all we did was go in there and look for the phrases and then figure out how we knew that it was a proper phrase. We didn't have to do anything in terms of sub-sentence functions yet. So if you would take that out, let's do a couple of these, walk through them together. I'd like to take just the first one. Melissa considers your apology totally inadequate. So my first question would be, I'll start with Kate, because you're at the top of my picture list. What are the noun phrases in this sentence?
Melissa and your apology.
Very good, exactly. You picked up the your. That's part of the noun phrase. How did you prove Melissa to yourself? What general constituency test tells you that Melissa is a noun phrase?
It's the first subject.
Well, that's true. That would tell us why it's the subject, but how do you know it's a noun phrase? Remember the 3 tests? Movement, can we move it? No. Can we, let's see.
Perform substitution.
We could do that. Perform substitution by putting in she, right? Would work perfectly. Okay, Rachel, you're in this sentence.
I don't know. Go away now. Oh, what the heck? Oh.
And I'm going to say the adjective phrase is both of those two parts.
So put it together, it's totally inadequate.
Totally inadequate. Remember, if you're looking at an adjective, sometimes it will have an adverb intensifier, like very, or in this case, totally.
Okay.
And what kind of a word is totally?
You said adverb.
Very good. All right. So we look at this and we go, Melissa is a noun phrase. We could replace it with she. Your apology was a noun phrase. We could replace that with it. We could replace considers your apology totally inadequate. We could actually do that with the word did. Melissa did, because we couldn't go in there and Melissa did your apology totally inadequate. That doesn't work. Totally inadequate is how did she find your apology totally inadequate, and how inadequate? Totally. So there's just a quick run through of the way we could do that. All right, I am now down to Aiden. Aiden, why don't you run us through all of number 2?
All right, Harriet baked Gerald a special pie. I wrote that Harriet in and of itself is a noun phrase because it answers the question who. Gerald is a noun phrase because it answers the question who. And both of those can be replaced with a pronoun. Harriet can be replaced with she, Gerald with he. And then a special pie is a noun phrase. It answers what. The verb phrase in this sentence is baked Gerald a special pie. It answers what did Harriet do? And there is an adjective phrase and it is the word special.
Great.
It answers the question what kind of pie.
Wonderful. Now, I only have a little bit of a hang up on a special pie because you said, well, okay, it answers the question what. I guess you could say, what did Harriet bake for Gerald? And then you could say a special pie. Now I understand what you meant. Good. That works. All right, Kayla, we're now down to you. This is a long one. And so, Kayla, I'm going to let you do all of number 3. And interestingly, with number 3, you may not have recognized this, but there's 2 ways to do this. Maybe you recognized it. So let's see. Go ahead with number 3.
I put she as a noun phrase.
Yep.
Must bake. I put it as an adjective, but I think it should be an adverb.
Well, actually, must is a modal verb. So it's really two words together to make up the verb. Must bake. So it's kind of like should bake or will bake, right? Mm-hmm. So the verb in there, must bake, is the verb. What's the whole verb phrase?
Bake the mixture.
No, it starts with must.
Oh, must bake the mixture.
And it goes all the way to the end of the sentence.
Oh, in the oven for an hour.
Very good. Okay, so now this is really important, and I know it's easy to miss. Think about verb. Okay, great. Must bake. Wonderful. No, a verb phrase is going to go from the verb or occasionally words that describe it and go all the way to the end of the clause or all the way to the end of the sentence. Don't forget, because that is the complete predicate, and that's what we mean by the verb phrase. Okay? All right, keep going.
I put in the oven as a prepositional phrase,
Yes,
and then for an hour, another prepositional phrase.
great.
And that's all I got so far.
Okay, so let's talk about the mixture. What kind of a phrase is the mixture? Because you didn't tell me that one.
A noun phrase.
Okay, so that's a noun phrase, the mixture. Then you said in the oven. Is there any other phrases inside in the oven?
The oven.
Yes. And how about for an hour?
I put prepositional.
Yes.
An hour,
preposition phrase.
can that be a noun phrase? An hour?
Betcha, exactly. So one way of doing this is she. We could replace that with a name, or we could use it as who did it, she did it. So it answers the question. Must bake the mixture in the oven for an hour. Everybody listen really carefully. Take the verb and the verb right at the beginning. Take the verb and go all the way to the end of the sentence when you're calling out the verb phrase. So then we have the mixture, a noun phrase, in the oven, a prepositional phrase with the oven noun phrase, for an hour, with an hour being a noun phrase in that prepositional phrase. Did anybody else think of it differently? Anybody think of this differently?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it? I was not paying close attention.
Okay, so I was saying we had she and must bake the mixture in the oven for an hour. Then we had the mixture, we said in the oven, and for an hour, with the oven and an hour noun phrases inside those prepositional phrases. Did anybody think of doing this a different way?
I had 4 noun phrases and they were just she, the mixture, the oven, and an hour.
Okay.
That's it.
Now, there is one other way of looking at this. I'm just going to talk to you, just kind of put it in front of you. We said she's got to make the mixture and where in the oven and for how long for an hour. So basically, in the oven described the verb bake, must bake, where it's going to happen, and for an hour, we're talking about kind of the thing that gets that verb also. We could think of it as the mixture in the oven. Looking
Again. You're kidding me. Why the Wi-Fi so bad? Why? Come on.
so that you would have to look at it. I would give you the hint that there's probably 2 possible ways of doing it. I don't recall if it's on the final or not, and I do it for 301. Yes, I'm not sure I do it in this one, but just so that you recognize, sometimes we get sentences that could be interpreted 2 or 3 different ways. That's kind of important. Okay, so Kayla, you did number 3. Let's see, Rachel, you're gonna get to do number 4.
Okay. So have a zoning noun phrase,
Yep,
wife noun phrase, expensive gift noun phrase, his birthday noun phrase,
okay,
and then the bought his wife expensive gift for her birthday.
good.
What's it? Verb phrase.
Yep, very good.
And then I have his is adjective.
Let's just call possessive words like his, in this case, a determiner. Because it
Okay,
works
so
just
this
like
is,
the. And so
determinant.
yeah, it's a determiner. So his wife is a noun phrase, as you mentioned,
Okay. Expensive adjective phrase.
right?
Her is another possessive determinant.
Yeah, and so we take her and birthday together as a noun phrase, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. I'll leave you to just go back over number 5 in the key and check your work against that. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do kind of a breakout here for a minute, and what I'm going to want you to do. I'm going to put you into pairs, hopefully, and I want you to do the same thing that you just did, except now we're going to add sentence function. Is this a subject? Is it a verb? Is it an object, etc.? So it's basically, you're still going to go through the sentence I give you and find all the phrases and telling me what kind of phrase it is. But the new stuff is telling me the sentence function. Let's do one together. The first one that I want to do is, the frog suddenly became a green prince. Aisha, can you find me any noun phrases?
The frog,
Yeah,
green print,
not just green print,
a green print.
a green prince, right. Don't forget those, you're going to capture those determiners. They come at the beginning of noun phrases. You don't want to miss those. Okay, let's see. Emma, is there a verb phrase in here?
Would it be, became a prince?
We shorten one word. Remember, it's the verb or the words that describe it. And then go to the end of the sentence. What word is describing became?
Suddenly became?
Suddenly, very good. So we've got the frog is a noun phrase, suddenly became a green prince is the verb phrase. A green prince is another noun phrase. And let's see. Aisha, I'm coming back to you because your picture's right there. Do you have any more phrases in here?
Yeah, one more time, I'm sorry.
Do we have any more phrases in here?
Is green print is a adjective.
Now, remember what we, well, no, you're not wrong. Adjective was the place to start. Remember, we wouldn't say that there's a noun inside an adjective phrase. Adjective phrases are inside noun phrases. So if a green prince is a noun phrase and green is an adjective, we would call that what kind of phrase?
I don't know.
Adjective.
Oh.
Okay.
Adjective phrase.
Adjective phrase. Great.
Okay.
What's the subject of this sentence?
The frog. The frog.
The frog. Exactly. What is the predicate, Rachel?
The predicate is suddenly became green friends.
Great. And let's see, I've got to go down here because I keep seeing all the same people. Teresa. What is a green prince?
That's a adjective phrase.
Well, no, it's a noun phrase. A green prince. The whole thing is a noun phrase, but what's its function in the sentence?
The object.
No, what kind of object would it be? It's not really an object. Became is actually kind of a linking verb. And so a green prince is redescribing the frog. So it is probably a,
I don't know.
okay, Mandy. What is a green prince? If this is a linking verb or an intensive verb, and this redescribes or renames the frog or describes it, what would that be?
Indirect object?
No, we can't have an indirect object without a direct object, and we don't have one of those. It's your turn. It's not a direct object, not an indirect object. It's after a linking verb. It redescribes the subject. It must be a
Subject complement.
okay. Subject complement. That is correct. And if you wanted to call out suddenly, you would probably say it's an adverb that describes the verb. We missed that one. Adverb phrase suddenly, which describes the rest of the predicate. Okay. The frog could be replaced with it, and it's the subject. Suddenly became a green prince. What happened to the frog? It suddenly became a green prince. Verb phrase. What happened to it? We use that as a question, and it's the predicate. One is a way we could replace a green prince. The frog suddenly became one. Well, that's a proform substitution for a subject complement. Green, what color prince? That's an adjective phrase, modifying the noun. There's the first one that we're going to use for you guys. Now, I'm going to send you a chat message, I think. Let's see here, chat. Did it already go out? So, chat. Okay, watch this. Here comes the sentence that I want you to deal with. Sally and Roberta discussed the lengthy proposal. We're going to go into a breakout room. I've got 8 people here. I only got 9 people. So we're going to go out in groups of 3. And I'm going to create the room. And 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, perfect. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to go out there and do what we've just done. List all of the component constituents. Say what kind of a phrase it is, and say what kind of a subject function it is, or what role it's playing in the subject. This question is Sally and Roberta discuss the length proposal. Are you ready? Too late. See you later.
What's up, party people?
So I have, well, I'm actually doing it right now. So.
Okay.
do you think lengthy would be an adverb? First,
Lengthy is an adjective.
or
So I think the lengthy proposal is a noun phrase because proposal is the head word. I think lengthy is an adjective. And maybe the lengthy
Yeah.
proposal is also a prepositional phrase, but I'm not sure. So Sally and Robert are definitely subject.
Yeah, Sally, Roberta are now. Yeah,
Discuss the
perfect.
lengthy proposal is the full predicate, the complete predicate. All right, I'm like cooking French toast. I couldn't wait.
You said discuss the lengthy proposal with the complete predicate
Complete
or
predicate.
the
Right?
what?
Huh?
You said discuss the lengthy proposal as a predicate or the
That's-
lengthy proposal.
Complete.
Discuss because the complete predicate starts
So
the verb. and
discuss
goes to
Start
it.
there.
I'm putting it in the chat, by the way. It's all labeled. That's like my confirmation. Okay. I'm pretty confident those are correct. And then
Do you think there's a subject complement?
subject complement. No, because a subject complement
Or
is
just
like
whatever? Yeah, like this one has.
Yeah,
yeah,
oh
a subject complement describes the subject and changes it. So like Sally and Roberta are mad. Mad would be a subject complement because it's telling you about Sally. So the lengthy proposal I believe is a direct object because it's not a subject complement and it's not an indirect object because it cannot have an indirect object without a direct object. So that is my little solving process. But I think that's it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that sounds good. It's pretty fast. I'll still like listen to it.
Do you want to write that down or do you want me to go get that quick?
I wrote something down. I think I have it.
Okay. It's also in the chat, so hang on here. How do you guys feel about the second portfolio thing?
I think it was pretty smooth actually.
I thought it was a little easier.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking for some reason. I don't know if it was because we already knew what to do. Like similarly, just different type of things to use, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's easier.
Felt a little more straightforward, like kind of knew what to do. All right, closing in a minute. Are we good? We're set?
Yeah, I think we're good.
We're fucking solid.
Okay, almost everybody back. Almost everybody's back. All right, great. Let us see. I don't know. Who wants to tell me all about this? Mandy was the first one back.
Yes, sir.
Is that supposed to be a reward so you don't have to do it?
No,
Okay. Let's see. Teresa.
Yes, sir. So we said,
What was
the noun phrase is Sally and
No,
Roberta
stop.
and the Lacey proposal. The verb phrase is
No.
Great.
and then Lacey would be the adjective phrase.
Yeah. How about
How
the
many class do you
proposal?
go?
Yeah, that's a noun phrase.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you say. Did you
Oh.
give me the verb phrase yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's three noun phrases, Sally, Roberta, the Lacey proposal. One verb phrase, discuss the Lacey proposal. And then the adjective phrase is lengthy.
Okay.
Can
Now,
you
I would say
stop?
one other possibility, and that is we could call
Good.
Sally a noun phrase all by itself. You could call it two if you want to, but they kind of go together. What's the function of Sally and Roberta? Okay.
Okay, wait, the function as in the
What role is Sally and Roberta playing in this sentence?
subject,
Great. How about the lengthy proposal?
the direct object.
Very good. And I'll just throw out lengthy. What's lengthy doing?
Um,
Don't overthink it.
and it's an adjective, it's modifying the.
Yes, you're right. It's an adjective, but we could say that it is an adjective describing proposal, right? So even though it doesn't have like a major name, we should still call out
Stop.
lengthy as an adjective phrase describing or modifying proposal. Okay,
Can I give you one quick question? So the lengthy proposal, because that starts with a preposition, is that also a prepositional phrase or is that not?
what's the preposition?
Isn't it the? Am I completely out of pocket?
Yeah. You're out.
Can you
Okay.
stop? I'm in class.
A determiner.
Oh man, there's Kayla. She's got it. Okay, right. An A and all of the possessive words are determiners. And so as we might expect, a determiner is at the very beginning of a noun phrase.
I was just testing you, all right? How about that?
Did I pass?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't pass. Kayla passed. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna give you one more. I'm only gonna give you 3 minutes. Record where's my breakout rooms. There they are. We're gonna leave you in the same groups, and I am going to option you at 3 minutes. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna send this to you. Where's my check? Send it. Save the chat? No. Send it. There it goes. You should have it in your chat window. The blue convertible sped down the highway toward town. See you in a couple of minutes. Like 3.
Am I coming? Hey, Mandy.
Hi.
All right, Emma might get here. Oh, that's good. Hey, Emma. We thought we lost you.
Oh, sorry, I was just writing the something.
I'm playing you game. Okay. Subject. Do you know what towards town would be? I have to look up the party speech of towards.
Yeah, I'm trying to write it down. Well, I know you're doing it, but I'm just trying to do it on my own.
No, you're good.
But let me
Spread down. Predicate. Predicate. Not yet.
How you guys feeling?
I think it's good.
Okay. Mandy,
Yeah,
doing
good.
good?
Yeah. No.
Okay, everybody's back. I've rolled into the final, I actually have 1 minute past the end time. And only because Kay came in 1 minute after the start time. So you will find that out in week 12's task list or the folder on D2L, you can find the key to this particular set of questions. It'll be there and available about 2:30. And again, you could also want to go back and look at exercise 2 in the key, and you want to kind of consolidate your questions around why they are what they are, or why they are what they're marked, and get back to me so I can make sure that you understand what it is that I'm looking for. So when you hit the exam, you can speed through this part, okay? As is my normal plan, I'm just going to sit here until everybody's gone, so that if you've got more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We're not going to review the sentence.
Well, we're already over our time. If you want to stay, I will review the sentence.
No, I'm good. I appreciate it. I was just curious. I think that,
I didn't think you really wanted to do it. This is grammar class. People don't want to do this stuff. Okay. Any questions? Okay, got any questions? Oh, Emma. Oh, was that a bye?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bye.
I have
Okay,
a question.
bye. Yes, ma'am.
So then, down the highway, toward down is object complement, right?
Sped down the highway? No, and it's not really even a direct object. It's kind of a, down the highway would be a prepositional phrase that is describing how they sped. In fact, it's sped down the highway, and then you can do a couple of different things. You could say sped and down the highway and toward town as both going with the verb phrase, or the highway could actually be the highway toward town. You could have called that a noun. Either
So what-
one would have been perfectly valid. So you could have said, I sped where? Down the highway toward town. Or I sped down the highway and my direction was toward town. In which case, you've got two prepositional phrases, down the highway and toward town.
What's the function?
I would just call it a verb complement or
Oh.
describes the verb.
Okay, verb complement.
And interestingly, this happens a lot. Get little prepositional phrases like down the highway and toward town. And often, very often, those prepositional phrases actually act like an adverb with the verb. They're not adverbs, they're prepositional phrases, but they act that way. They act as if just the same as sped quickly or I sped down the highway.
Could be verb accompaniment, could be object or no object. It's different from the first.
What?
So hot, 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 hot.